A rusted Bianchi Specialissima sat in a driveway in Michigan, tagged at $15. That frame, once cleaned, appraised at $3,200. 5 garage sale bikes. 5 prices that made no sense until the history behind them did. Peugeot PX10, $40. That was the asking price for a sun-faded orange frame leaning against a card table at a yard sale outside Portland. A Peugeot PX10, built sometime in the early 1970s, priced like a broken exercise machine. The context behind that $40 matters. By the late 1960s, Japanese manufacturers were flooding North American bike shops with affordable 10 speeds, functional, reliable, and priced so low that European brands could not match them on cost alone. Raleigh was struggling, Gitane was struggling, and Peugeot, a company that had been building bicycles since 1882, was facing a moment of real competitive pressure. The only move left was to go the other direction entirely, build something so technically strong that price comparison became irrelevant. The PX10 was that response. Reynolds 531 double-butted steel tubing ran through the entire main triangle. Simplex competition derailleur handled the shifting. Maufac center pull brakes provided the stopping power. Total weight hovered around 22 pounds, remarkably light for a production road bike in the early 1970s, when most comparable bikes were pushing 26 or 27. The Nervex Pro lugs used in the frame construction were brazed with a cleanliness that rivaled custom Italian work at triple the price. None of this was kept quiet. The Peugeot factory team rode PX10s at the Tour de France's throughout the late 60s and early 70s. Between 1903 and 1983, Peugeot-sponsored riders won the Tour de France 10 times. Eddie Merckx, widely regarded as the greatest road racer in history, won the World Championship on a Peugeot in 1967. That is not a footnote. That is the bike's racing DNA on the record. The problem is volume. During the bike boom of the 1970s, PX10s sold in enormous numbers. They ended up on every campus, in every garage, and eventually at every garage sale. The sheer quantity in circulation trained people to treat them like any other old 10-speed. Most sellers at a yard sale have never heard of Reynolds 531. They see faded orange paint and ask $40. A clean PX10 with original Simplex and Maufac components currently sells between $400 and $800 on vintage cycling forums and eBay. Fully restored examples with intact Nervex Pro lugs and undamaged chrome work fetch closer to $1,200. That $40 yard sale bike represented a 10-to-1 return at minimum and closer to 30-to-1 fully restored. The PX10 proved that a half-century-old French production bike could still hold serious value. The next bike came from a Japanese company most collectors had written off entirely, and it turned out to be the hidden gem in this group. Miyata Team, $25. Zip-tied to a broken stationary trainer at a garage sale in Denver. A Miyata Team, still wearing its original Shimano Dura Ace group set under a coat of basement dust. Priced as if the group set alone were not already worth multiples of that. Miyata's history as a manufacturer goes back to 1881, predating Raleigh, predating most European cycling brands, starting with blades and firearms before pivoting to bicycles. In Japan, the name carried weight. In the United States, it carried almost none. Schwinn was the American brand. Raleigh was the British brand. Miyata was the import that arrived quietly, without a century of American advertising behind it, and got overlooked at every level of the market. The Team Miyata was the company's answer to that problem. The frame used triple-butted chromoly tubing, a construction technique that varied wall thickness not twice, like conventional double-butting, but 3 times, removing material from sections that bore the least stress. Frame weight came in under 5 pounds. Geometry was drawn specifically for road racing, not touring or commuting. the full Shimano Dura Ace drivetrain, Japan's answer to Campagnolo Nuovo record ran smoothly in a way that Japanese engineering had by then mastered completely. Riders who tested the Team Miyata against custom Italian builds at comparable prices consistently came away describing the ride as equal or superior. The company never cracked the American market the way the product deserved. Distribution was limited. Marketing was minimal. The Team Miyata showed up in a handful of shops, sold quietly to people who found it by accident, and then disappeared into the same garages and basements as everything else from that era. Today, a clean Team Miyata, in complete original condition, sells between $400 and $800. Against a $25 purchase price, the margin is significant. 16-to-1 at the low end, 32-to-1 at the top. The Dura Ace group set alone, in original, unmodified condition, accounts for a meaningful share of that number. Japanese and French builders had both proven by then that great steel was not the exclusive province of any one country. But the next bike came from the nation that wrote the original playbook for lightweight racing frames, and from a brand that had accidentally buried its best work under decades of ordinary ones. Raleigh Professional $50, hand-lettered tag on masking tape, folding lawn chair beside it. A Raleigh Professional from the mid-1970s, leaning against a garage wall in suburban Philadelphia, priced like a department store cruiser, which, from a distance, is exactly what most Raleighs look like. That is the core problem with finding a Raleigh Professional in the wild. Raleigh had been building bicycles since 1887. For much of the 20th century, that history was expressed not in race-ready frames, but in 3-speed commuters, shoppers, and heavy 10 speeds sold through department stores. Those bikes were everywhere. They still are. Finding one at a garage sale means nothing. 3-speed Raleigh shoppers in functional condition go for $20 to $30 on Craigslist in any mid-sized city. The Professional existed for a different reason entirely. By the early 1970s, Raleigh's identity had become so thoroughly associated with practical, affordable cycling that the brand had lost credibility at the top of the market. The Professional was the company's attempt to reclaim it. A bike hand-brazed at the Nottingham factory by the same craftsmen responsible for the team-level racing frames, using Reynolds 531 competition tubing throughout. Full Campagnolo Nuovo record group set, chrome fork tips and rear dropouts, frame weight around 22 pounds, fit and finish that matched what was coming out of northern Italy, at a price that undercut it. Racing credibility followed. The TI Raleigh Professional squad was one of the dominant teams in European cycling through the late 1970s. Their Tour de France results, including Henny Kuiper's stage wins, and the team's overall dominance in multi-day stage races, gave the production Professional a direct lineage to bikes that had actually competed at the highest level. The spec was not aspirational, it was the same. A clean Raleigh Professional with original Campagnolo components sits comfortably between $800 and $1,500 in the current vintage market. The gap between a $50 garage sale sticker and $1,500 is one of the widest on this list, and it exists almost entirely because of brand confusion. The name says Raleigh. Most people hear department store. Almost nobody hears Campagnolo Nuovo record. Raleigh proved that a mass-market brand could hide a masterpiece inside its catalog. The next bike came from an American manufacturer facing the exact same problem, and managed to build something that, $15 at a time, keeps disappearing from garage sales completely unrecognized. Now, into the final two. Before the last segments, this channel covers overlooked steel and forgotten frames every week. The real numbers, the real history, none of the filler. Subscribing means these videos come up without searching for them. Schwinn Paramount $15. Church rummage sale outside Chicago. A faded metallic blue frame with Campagnolo cable guides running along the top tube and chrome lugs catching the light in a parking lot. A Schwinn Paramount built in the early 1970s, priced by someone who saw the word Schwinn and reached for the lowest number on the table. That logic is understandable. Schwinn dominated American cycling for decades, and they did it by selling volume, not precision. The Varsity, the Continental, the Suburban, heavy bikes built to tolerable standards and distributed through department stores at prices that could not be beaten. Schwinn meant accessible. Schwinn meant American. Schwinn meant the exact opposite of what a collector looks for in a vintage racing frame. The Paramount was the exception Schwinn never quite managed to publicize properly. By the early 1960s, European racing bikes had made the rest of the Schwinn catalog look dated. Sinelli, Colnago, DeRosa. These names were arriving in American cycling magazines alongside race results, and none of them came with a Schwinn sticker. The company needed a halo product, something that could sit next to a Sinelli without apology. The Paramount was built for exactly that purpose, and it was built completely separately from the main production floor. A small, dedicated team of frame builders, working with Columbus or Reynolds double-butted tubing depending on the year, hand-brazed each frame individually. Full Campagnolo Nuovo record components came standard, chrome details on the fork crown and lugs, weight ranging from 21 to 23 pounds, depending on year and configuration. Paramount frames appeared at Olympic trials and national championships throughout the 1960s and 70s. They were ridden by amateur racers who could not afford Italian customs but refused to race on department store steel. Today, a 1970s Paramount in good original condition sells between $1,000 and $2,500. Track builds and exceptional chrome examples push past $3,000. The $15 rummage sale find sat on the wrong side of a 200-to-1 gap, a gap created almost entirely by a brand name that trained everyone around it to expect less. The Paramount proved American craftsmen could build to European standards, but the $15 bike from the intro came from the country that set those standards in the first place. And what was hiding under that cracked handlebar tape in Michigan was something very different from what the price tag implied. Bianchi Specialissima $15, a folding table in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Sun-bleached Celeste paint, cracked handlebar tape, and a Campagnolo Super Record group set underneath a film of garage dust. The full build visible to anyone who looked past the surface condition, priced at $15. Bianchi had been building bicycles in Treviglio, Italy since 1885, one of the oldest cycling brands still in operation anywhere in the world. By the mid-1970s, that history was not translating into victories. Colnago was the frame Eddie Merckx chose for his late career dominance. DeRosa was where the top Italian riders went when they wanted something custom. Bianchi's presence at the front of the professional peloton had faded, and the brand needed a response that went beyond catalog updates. The Specialissima was that response. Columbus SL tubing, the lightweight, high-tensile alloy that Italian frame builders had developed specifically for road racing, formed the main triangle. Investment cast dropouts held tolerances that forged alternatives could not consistently match. Frame weight came in around 4 pounds for the bare frame. The Campagnolo Super Record Group set added to a complete build weight that competed with anything else available at the time. The lug work on a Specialissima is still referenced by custom frame builders today, not as historical curiosity, but as a technical benchmark for clean line work and precise brass application. The racing connection was not incidental. Felice Gimondi, winner of the Tour de France, 3 editions of the Giro d'Italia, and the Vuelta a España, one of only 7 riders in history to complete the Grand Tour triple, raced for the Bianchi Campagnolo team from 1973 through 1979. The Specialissima was not a consumer replica of the team bike built to similar geometry. It was the team bike, produced for the public at the same specification the professionals raced. That distinction matters in the vintage market in a way that catalog descriptions rarely capture. A complete Specialissima with original Campagnolo super record components sells between $1,500 and $4,000 in the current market. Top examples with matching serial numbers, intact Celeste paint, and untouched chromework have pushed past $5,000. The $15 bike in Michigan, after a full cleaning, mechanical service, and professional assessment, appraised at $3,200, more than 200 times its garage sale price without a single replacement part. 5 bikes. A Peugeot PX10 at $40, worth up to $1,200. A Miyata Team at $25, worth up to $800. A Raleigh Professional at $50, worth up to $1,500. A Schwinn Paramount at $15, worth up to $2,500. And a Bianchi Specialissima at $15, appraised at $3,200. Combined purchase price $145. Combined value at the high end of current market estimates, over $11,000. The gap is not the result of luck. It is the result of information that the sellers did not have. Every one of these bikes sat in somebody's garage for years, in some cases decades, before ending up on a folding table with a handwritten price tag. The sellers were not careless people. They inherited the bike, or picked it up at an estate sale, or held on to it through a move, and never found a reason to learn what it was. A Schwinn looks like a Schwinn. A Raleigh looks like a Raleigh, without the specific knowledge that certain model names within those brands represent something completely different from the rest of the catalog. The default assumption is always the wrong one. The information that separates a $15 sticker from a $3,000 appraisal is not obscure. Model names are stamped into the frame or printed on head badges. Reynolds 531 tubing stickers survive on down tube joints for 50 years. Campagnolo components are identifiable in 30 seconds from a phone photo. The entire knowledge gap that creates these garage sale prices closes with about 5 minutes of searching, but only if the person looking at the bike knows to search at all. These bikes are still out there, leaning against walls in garages in Michigan and Philadelphia and Denver, propped in basements behind holiday decorations, still wearing their original group sets, waiting for someone to recognize what they are. The vintage steel market has grown significantly over the past decade, but the supply of unidentified frames at yard sales has not shrunk at the same rate. There are more buyers who know what a Bianchi Specialissima is worth than there are sellers who do. The window for finding these at folding table prices is not permanent. It narrows every year as more information circulates and more people arrive at garage sales with a phone in hand. The bikes that have not been found yet are the ones still waiting for someone to look past the dust, check the head badge, and spend 5 minutes on a search that changes the number on the price tag by a factor of 200. More videos exactly like this one are already on this channel. Overlooked frames, forgotten brands, and the real numbers behind them. Subscribe to see them when they go live. And if there is a garage sale bike collecting dust somewhere, a brand name, a model, a year, drop it in the comments. It might be worth a closer look.